Hi, guys. Is everyone battling the crud that has hit the Gardner house to some degree? Yeah, I'm with you, Tanya.
There's so much stuff going around right now.
Yeah.
They were even talking about it on the national news, why the season had hit earlier, and they were saying it was because we were so careful in the last couple of years with masking and hand washing and all that, and now that that's kind of gone by the wayside in some ways, it's hitting us all harder and faster. And
The short-term memory
Everybody
of
has forgotten how to wash their hands now.
yeah.
And we need to get back to that.
Yes,
kind of scary.
it is. I try to teach my 7-year-olds to share, but not illnesses. And so they were home 3 days this week with the flu and just were like, here you go, Mom. You can have it too. Oh man. I did see some the news were picking up on the impact on childcare providers as well. Both that the illnesses impacting workers and also workers in non-childcare families, and then also workers who staff shortages. They're hard in the best of times, and it's even harder when there are illnesses going around like this. So no shortage of opportunities to get our message out about the essentialness and the need to make some systemic change in the industry. All right, well, we're supposed to talk about childcare recruitment and retention in this working group. So if you were wanting to talk about something else, you are in the wrong room. We don't have a ton of time, and I know last time we talked about, we just kind of threw everything out there on the table, and we talked about really wanting to maybe see like what's in the universe is going on in Kansas related to recruitment and retention. So I kind of have that list that we talked about. You heard some updates this morning about the KDHE childcare licensing campaign, lots of updates from the DCF. Relief funding work. Michelle mentioned ECE shared resources, which I think is also going to be a great site for providers. But really our purpose today is to continue to hone in and feel like, is there something that, with the folks around this table at this level would want to take on as a project over the next however many months that can support childcare recruitment and retention efforts. I know that's a very vague ask. So I'm going to put just my notes in the chat here. Hopefully this works. And then I'm also going to put a link. Oh, that's not working. Okay, well, they weren't that profound, so you're not missing a whole lot. There is the strategic plan, if that helps too, which will take you to goal 6, which is around the workforce. Anything there sparks your attention? I know many of you are involved in different efforts across the system. Is there anything that in your conversations that you're like, we need to dive more into that, even if it's just a 1 or 2 month kind of work? Or any of you doing local efforts that you're like, man, we could really do this kind of work at a state level, and this would be a good group to tackle it. So we don't have to take the big bite, we can take a little bite. But I want to be really respectful and useful. You guys are really the experts here. So what feels...
Well, Sarah, I would say you are the holder of lots of information. Oh, Eldana, I'm so sorry. I didn't see you had your hand up. You go ahead.
No worries, Reva, at all. So basically, kind of a comment and a possible suggestion. Comment is I have a little concern that there's a lot of duplication of effort going on, and that would like to identify some way of helping to solve that. I mean, using my own county as an example, finding out that like one of our resource referral agencies is reaching out to some of our entities, and that's great, but it seems like it would be more efficient if it was a joint effort, you know, the resource referral agency and the licensing agency going together. So they're going out to talk to chambers of commerce, whatever, about the importance and the need for childcare, but then could follow it right up with, and here's how you get started. Here's what you need to do to open a childcare home or a childcare center. So a little bit of concern about duplication of effort. And then the suggestion, I guess, a possible suggestion is, fortunately, my county commissioners have recognized the importance of early care and have given some funding to some local agencies. One of the options that we're going to try to work on is creating a comprehensive class. And it sounds like it's gonna, I have one of my staff is on the SIT team and talked a little bit about the toolkit. So I think that it would be well. So maybe this could be like a model that other people could recreate. And the fact that it would start, of course, with the childcare licensing folks giving the regulatory information and the necessary how-tos, things that we as licensing have to present, but then would also include things like contracting and insurance and building a business plan and budgeting and all those kinds of things. So that have a person in our county with the Women's Business Center that has built that curriculum and is going to try to revamp it. So that's something that we're hoping to implement with some of the funding our Board of County Commissioners gave, but maybe something that might be replicable across the state for others to be able to benefit from.
2 questions, Aldana, to follow up with that. Who was the audience for that class and who was actually delivering the class? Like who was actually doing it?
Sure. So the audience, of course, would be those interested in starting a home daycare. Target would be home daycare. Small centers could also be involved, but the only target would be home daycares. And the most likely it will be, well, the regulatory piece would have to be my staff,
Sure.
the licensing staff across the state. But the other piece would be business people like that know how to do a business plan, and somebody, maybe an accountant that knows about, the taxes and reporting. So we're still kind of in the development stage, but it seems like it would certainly be beneficial, because I know that we definitely see some home providers that go, oh, I'm a new mom, I want to stay home with my baby and I'm going to open a daycare center, and then they're floundering. So, we're getting in insurance challenges or whatever. So it just seems like that might be something that will, if we kind of like a lot of the supports, I was really thrilled like you, a lot of the supports we heard about, but think that, maybe that would be something that would be helpful also.
Amy. Oh, you're muted, Amy.
Along the lines of what Aldana was talking about, it reminds me when I opened my center, I got an SBA loan and I worked through the SBA and our local, I forget exactly what it was, but it was like a small business startup kind of an agency. But what they did was not only did they help me get the funding part in place, they put me in touch with SCORE, which is the Society of something of retired executives. And basically what they do is what you were talking about. They help you understand, how to set up your business model, how to do your financial pieces, how to make your projections, all of that business stuff that you need to know. And so they made sure that I had a business model that was financially viable, and feasible before I ever opened my doors. So it just makes me think in terms of not duplicating efforts. Is there some way that we can blend the SCORE and the Small Business Administration model and overlay it with a childcare focus? whether it's a small center or a family child care program, and overlay it with the model that already exists through the Small Business Administration and their they're all volunteers, retired executives that volunteer in that capacity. Now, I know they only have SCORE offices in Wichita and Topeka, and I utilize the office in Topeka, but at this point, they've expanded over the years to where they do virtual visits and et cetera. So you no longer have to go to their offices anymore. So they'll meet with you remotely to help you get through those pieces. So I just wonder if there wouldn't be a way to connect all those dots and make it something that's targeted, but we don't have to completely reinvent the wheel, maybe.
Thoughts, reactions? Feel free to just come off mute. It's a small group, so.
Oh, thank you for saying that, because I was having trouble finding my raise hand feature. I did something to
I was
my.
going to call on you eventually, Reva, because I knew you wanted to talk.
So, so to the point of all of this conversation so far, and part of what I was going to ask you, Sarah, as the holder of so much information, is I feel like there is so much great stuff happening out there, but it's hard to keep track of it all. And it's hard to know who's doing what, why they're doing it, what they're tasked with, So I don't know what the answer is. So part of my original question to you is, as we think about recruitment and retention, are you seeing some innovative models that are happening out there that are working, that maybe we should try to lift up as, here's a strategy that seems to really be getting traction? So that's part of it. And then I guess the other part of this, and I don't have an answer to any of this, but, how do we learn about what other entities are doing? Obviously, it comes up at meetings like this, but is there a way to build a repository for those of us that work in this industry so that we can connect with others that are doing similar work, others that are doing work that maybe we think we'd like to try and we want to get some lessons learned? Because it feels like a lot of energy is going into creating. And I just can't help but think that there are times that we are reinventing the wheel over and over again.
I can just speak from my perspective. It is a lot of spinning plates up in the air for sure. And when I hear about like innovative approaches, I think that word may be a little bit overused. I think anything that brings childcare providers into the field feels innovative at this point, but it's locally driven. And I think it's really hard to balance the role of like this kind of group with what really is, each of you is going back to your community and participating. Your own organization at a local level is doing things, your own community is doing things. And what's the connection? What's the ask? What's the need? So, Reva, if we had this list or repository of, Logan, if you're doing some great things in the southeast portion of the state, what's the kind of information that would be helpful to, to the Lawrence community where Amy and Jennifer, you guys are working, right? Like what's the why behind that? I think just a question. Go ahead, Jennifer.
No, I was going to say, I think that's where I struggle too, right? So just in talking with Head Start programs across the state, right? They've received multiple rounds of funding to try to increase recruitment and retention. And it is so individualized for each community. So some programs have seen retention bonuses work. Others have said that hasn't made a bit of difference, like people are leaving after they get their check, right? And I think it's also really hard because I think, you can look at some of the programs and they really haven't experienced any challenges. I don't want to say any, right, but much fewer than other programs. And I think when I think about those programs, not only do they have like a local kind of community driven maybe solution, but they also have really good cultures in their organizations. And I know these are organizations, we're not talking about individual family childcare providers, but I don't know. I think there's a piece in centers, I will just say, and maybe if you're working in a family childcare home, the person that you work for, there's a piece of that too that I don't think I just think plays a role in some of the retention efforts, I will at least say, or recruitment or wanting to go to work for some particular place. So I don't know, maybe I'm just rambling, but it does seem to be really individualized. And I think that's where I really struggle with thinking about it on like a statewide level.
Go ahead, Tanya.
So something that we started working on here in South Central Kansas that has started to gain some traction, and we're starting to see it's beginning to work, is we realize that we can't do it alone with the childcare crisis, and that with our economy struggling, we had to bring employers to the table in our area. And shockingly, the employers are very invested. And so we've gone into different communities. And recently, just last week, we had Spirit, Textron, very large employers show up to the room. And they said they want to be a part of the solution. We gave them options, and we heard their ideas on how they can help support childcare and support their employees. And it was ideas from building on-site childcare that they were ready to do. They just needed help doing it, to subsidizing childcare, to applying for the childcare tax credit that they weren't aware of, to partnering with childcare providers and help filling their childcare slots that they didn't have, and also help supporting and recruiting family childcare providers. I mean, these employers were willing to do whatever they needed, and we're throwing tons of ideas out, to the point that we're coming back together in December to discuss a half-day summit where we bring childcare providers to the room to meet these employers and figure out how they can network and partner and begin the process of working together. We did it in Sumner and Cowley, and we talked about what you were saying, Reva. Once we leave that community, we can't stay there and hold their hand forever. We need them to work together. So Cowley first volunteered to be that catch-all for everyone. The community decided, if you want to be a part of this, come to us and say, I want to be a business or an employer who's willing to get on board with this, and this is how I'm willing to do it. So anybody who comes to the childcare crisis discussion or wants to be a part of it can go to Cali First, where they'll hold a list of everybody who is able and willing to support. And that's kind of how that community is going to come together and work on it. And we did have one person there who showed up, just kind of walked in the door, and from a very Caldwell, and he happens to be just a developer, and said, I'm about to develop a ton of buildings, and I realized we probably won't have childcare, so I thought I'd show up. And he partnered. We always have childcare licensing in the room. It just makes sense. And so they partnered, and now they have a meeting in 2 weeks to discuss what they need to do to start building. So I think I know employers need to invest in this, and there are ways we need to bring them on board, because they're the ones with the money, and they're the ones who have they're in crisis too. And if they don't have childcare for their folks, that they're not going to sustain either. So I think that's kind of what we came to the conclusion on.
That's really impressive and inspiring, Tanya. Congrats. Reminds me of like the CIAs, the Communities in Action too, like how, these things are happening. Logan.
Hey y'all. I think for me, just as a policy advocate and as someone that's been trying to address, our main goal is to like increase childcare supply in rural communities across the state. The workforce compensation side of the conversation it's been the most forefront issue. And I think that to me, given, the launch of links to quality and like the workforce registries getting kind of underway, I think it would be interesting if we could work with KUCPPR. I know like Jennifer Buller's team is working on that like statewide fiscal model for varying program ideas, or like if ways in which, you could tweak and kind of subsidize childcare. And I think it would be really great to get to like some solid recommendations that we could pursue in the state legislature. I think that's like, as an advocate, I want to help distill that from you all as like the subject matter experts and people on the ground. But it's like, how are we facilitating that conversation to where we're getting to those recommendations that you all create, for what we should do, or how are we incorporating compensation into links to quality and incentivizing that program, like getting to those thoughts. I can't do myself, since I'm just an advocate. I'm not a provider myself. I'm not an expert, but I want to, I'm basically biting at the bit, ready for whenever we have those, that like substantive, community informed idea for how to really create a sustainable compensation infrastructure for the early childhood workforce. So I know it's a big one, but it's the thing that rings in my head all the time. And I'm frustrated that I can't work on it in 2023 legislative session because of that timing. But my goal would be that we could have something to pursue in the 2024 and spend 2023 connecting to people in our communities, talking to providers, talking to, like, to Tanya's point about businesses as well, because it's like, not only do businesses have money, businesses have influence. They are listened to by legislators. So I think being able to come up with some recommendations and some solid ideas there, and then have that time to then communicate the ideas, since it would be such a big investment. I think you would need some time just to have, providers connect to their legislators, explain to them the impact of that kind of, program and that kind of sustained funding for their community. So that was a lot, but yeah, that's, I think, for me, in regards to, like, when I think of workforce retention and recruitment, that is the glaring thing in my mind. But I would love to know what all you all think as well. And I think all the points are really great so far.
Go ahead, Lisa. Lisa, can you hear? Okay.
Yes, I can. To briefly touch on Logan's comments, workforce retention is the big piece in the wages. But the thing that I look at is there needs to be a framework that you can present to. And my thought was the Chamber of Commerce. Much like in the last meeting we had, they presented health insurance through the chambers. The Chambers of Commerce, particularly in our community, is the vehicle that connects to all of the employers. Getting the Chamber of Commerce on board is probably the biggest key. And whomever got their employers to down around Wichita, that was Tanya, that was a big plus.
I would just add that if somebody could talk to the Chamber of Commerce, and maybe this isn't the case in every community, but I know in Lawrence, for a small business, for a childcare center that has no, real profit margin there, it was prohibitively expensive. So if they would make it low to no money for a childcare center, then we would be much more inclined to actually pay for membership.
So I know we just have a couple minutes left. I really liked Aldana's idea at the beginning about that effort to really target childcare providers. I'm curious what other communities do as it relates to that. Again, not thinking about duplication of services. We know we have Links to Quality that does business supports and startup. Like there's lots of these kinds of efforts happening. Is there something that we could, as a panel, as a working group, is there some kind of like best practice that we could offer to communities who want to do something like this? And then I think about, Tanya, your idea or the success you guys have had. So rather than think about a repository of all the ideas, how can we hone in on the ideas that get business to the table? What are the strategies? What are the messages? Is there some kind of, for lack of a better word, toolkit we could produce that's based on the lessons learned of all of these communities who have been doing work, that, maybe it has some of that language that touches a little bit, Logan, on the legislative piece, but also the role that a business community can play. I think about that podcast, No One Is Coming to Save Us. Like, I think waiting for like federal aid or state aid is a non-starter, right? We have to be a little bit more proactive and creative in thinking about how do we add payers to the system in a different way, because the money has to come from somewhere, either for the buildings or the wages or the bonuses or whatever it is. Does that feel like something this group has the connections or the resources to tackle? Would that be a value add to the communities you work in? We did the kindergarten transitions toolkit as a panel when the panel first got stood up. That seems like a good role that this group could play. I just don't want to Aldana's point at the beginning, duplicate something or, whatever saying you want to use, recreate the wheel. Like, I don't want to do something that's already been done, but it sounds like business is super critical and they're wanting to participate. How do we make that easy for them to participate, but also make it specific to each community? Logan? And we have 2 minutes and then we'll go back to the big room. So we'll just wrap this up. Go ahead, Logan.
This would be a quick question for Tanya, because it's just something that I always walk through in my mind of when talking to businesses and outlining, like these are the various ways you can support, like surveying your, supporting financially, like actually creating your own operations. How often, I guess, do they hear about some of the potential policy solutions? Because I think that would be interesting to me. Of what I've heard sometimes, especially about the tax credit, is that businesses are still so intimidated about getting into childcare that I think if they, from my perspective, and again, it's limited, would be if they had an idea of hey, we're thinking pretty big in regards to how we could actually publicly subsidize childcare to the point that I know that what I'm describing sounds kind of nightmarish to you right now, but hopefully with these other additional systems and with your support of those systems, and if you threw it in behind it, that would go a long way towards I don't know, that's part of where my mind is going, where if helping get them on board is the idea that they love the knowing that there's something that's going to be in perpetuity or sustainable that's from government, that certainty part, because so many of them in my community, their struggle is they don't know how to pay their workers enough. They're I have the money for building, I have the tax credit, but again, I don't know how I'm going to pay the workers. So it's that's just a part of the question I'm just curious about.
I'll be quick, but I can get with Sarah after this so that we're ready for the next time we meet. But I actually produced a video and a website with all of that, and that's how I approach employers. The video actually has the tax credit that is mind-blowing to them, that tells them how much money was left on the table, and that's kind of our kickoff to lead the conversation with employers. And then we get into the legislature and how it was changed, and then we get into all the other things that they can do to support their employees and how to entice new employees to onboard them. So that's exactly what we do. We lead with a video that we produced and a website we created, and we have all the family-friendly workplace flyers attached to it. And we also created an additional flyer to support that work. So yes, great question. And that's how we do it, but I won't keep going. I'll get with Sarah after so we can plan better.
Really love where this got to. I just leading up to January or I guess December. Oh my gosh, I've just skipped a month. I might put together like a poll and just try and see so we can, when we come back together, we've have already kind of narrowed and see what you guys want to actually tackle and focus on. So I don't know, I'll think about that based on some of these conversations, because I think there's some good stuff in here. It's just, where to start. So does anybody want to volunteer to share out? You guys with the nose thing. Ugh. Nobody wants to hear me talk at that. I've already talked. Somebody has to do this. Come on. Logan, do you want to share out? No?
Did you take notes that I could read off of?
I did. Sort of.
Give me your notes.
I'll email